so glad you could all make it. I am Dr. Paula Boros. You see, I got my Capella shirt today. I'm rocking it. I am licensed in Florida and Texas. I'm an approved supervisor in both states. And please ignore my dog that keeps trying to get attention over here. I'm currently residing in Killeen, Texas, so about Central Texas, right here next to Fort Cavos. Some of you might know it as Fort Hood. I am an AFT approved supervisor. When I'm not teaching at Capella or working in my group private practice, I'm often hanging out with my family and my dogs, and we love to go on adventures. I'm also really transparent. So if you have questions, just ask, okay? All right, so legal and ethics is my jam. Okay, some of you don't like this. You think, oh, I always hear there was nothing really legal or ethical. And I always like facepalm, literally, because every decision you make as a clinician, there's a legal and ethical decision regarding every decision, right? And I don't know if this is true, and Roxanne could tell me if it's not, but I find that it's the biggest way you lose your license when you don't follow legal and ethical things. I don't know about any of you, but I worked really hard to get this license, and I'd like to maintain it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, okay? So first, I want to know how many of you, okay, actually I have an activity and we're going to see if it works. If it doesn't work, I apologize. I'm not good with technology sometimes. So let me put it in the chat. We're going to create a word cloud. Okay. And again, this may or may not work. So I apologize if I'm not so tech savvy. So here you can go to menti.com, click on the link, use the code, okay? And I'm also going to put in, if it will let me, the QR code. Let's see if it will let me. Some will, some won't. All right, so if you go to those, I want you all to start putting in words. When you hear legal and ethical, what words come to mind? All right, so I see some of you are starting to do that. Go ahead. Let's take a couple minutes. Let's see if I can share my screen. Okay, nope. It's coming up, but it's super small. I don't know how to make it bigger. There we go. Okay, let's see. All right, and Roxanne, I should be able to share, right? Okay, let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see this?
So do you want us to go to that link or stay here? I'm sorry.
So if you go to the link, you can type in the words for legal and ethical. So when you think about legal and ethical, we're building a word cloud of what all that involves. So you click on that link and it will let you put in to continue to add to the word cloud that we have going on here. Okay. Yeah, so I'm seeing regulations, board, statutes, tough. Oh, I like that one. Personal accountability. Okay. Confidentiality, scary. Ooh, let's come back to that. License, grievances, risk, court, boards, laws, HIPAA. And whoever put in HIPAA put it in correctly. Good job with 2 A's and not 2 P's. Yes, right? Because that matters. Let's see. What else? Confidentiality, boundaries, records keeping, illegal. Okay. Anyone else as we're getting in there? Confusing. Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Autonomy. Mortality. Court.
Was morality, not that that was mine, but mortality really scares me.
Morality and not
morality. I think you said mortality. I was like, what? Okay.
In fairness, I am trying to read it upside down. I think that says subpoenas.
So the bigger the word, the more people put that in?
I believe so, yes. Or it's just how they're randomizing it. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I just found this and I thought it was cool. Okay, I'm going to give another 30 seconds as we're building this. Okay. So when you all look at these words, do they resonate with you? Does it seem like this is the topic that we should be having a conversation about? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So thank you for everyone that participated. So as we go back, group, tell me, did these words resonate with you? Did it make sense? Yes? Kind of? Okay, so there's a bunch to legal and ethics. And, you know, 1 hour is not enough for me to cover every state and every situation ever. Yes, in the chat, we should definitely be talking more about this. Yeah. In my site-based learning courses, I often hear, and my students that are here, they know, because I preach this a lot, when they're giving their case presentations, they always say there's nothing legal and ethical. And I always ask, did you sleep with your client? And then they get mad at me like, no, Dr. Boros, I didn't sleep with my client. Good job. Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you. But also, you just made a legal and ethical decision, right? When I was grading the ethics, class papers, and they would interview licensed MFTs, they would always say, I've never had a legal or ethical situation. And I always think, what kind of therapy are they doing? What's going on here? But you know what really happens is you all get so good at knowing the legal side and the ethics side that you forget that you're making that conscious choice. And so it's important to know it, but it's also important to realize that it also changes. I don't know about in any of your states, but in the 2 states that I'm licensed in, we've had lots of changes through COVID, through COAMT regulations, through just changes in general based on laws and rules. Yeah, it depends on your site. Yep, that's a good one too, yeah. So how many of you have actually visited your state law licensing board? Like website or in person or by the phone? Okay, I'm getting some hands. Okay. So there are many sites out there. It doesn't mean they're always updated. Okay. Sometimes even your state board is not always updated as the changes happen so quickly. But that's always going to be your first line of defense. Okay. To top that off, AMFT's Code of Ethics, because we're all in the MFT program, that's our second line of defense. Okay. So there's many sites out there that as you look at it, it will, like if you go to LMFT licensure, it will just pull up your state. These are helpful references, but you always want to refer back to your state for guidance and clarification. Just keeping it confidentiality and knowing what is and is not confidential is an ethic. Exactly, right. Okay, now, how many of your state boards have an email system, like a distro system that you can sign up for news and updates and when they're doing their meetings? How many of you don't even know if that's a thing or not for your board? Okay, so it sounds like we got to do some research. So I would tell you all, research, because I don't believe every state does have it, but of the ones that do, let's go look at them. Sign up for those emails. I've never heard a state say that it costs any money. So, and if it does, let me know. I'd be really interested in that. But I think it's really important because at least the two that I belong to, Texas and Florida, they both have distro lists, and I get updated on the changes in the laws. I get updated in when they're hosting their next meetings. I get updated about COVID procedures, and Florida just emailed us about telehealth, and right. So this is one great way to really be updated with what's happening in your state. How many of your boards have like a handbook? How many of you need to go research that? Okay, okay. I can see this. All right. So that's another way. So again, Texas and Florida have handbooks. So as they update the laws and they are going through, they say, follow this handbook. Here's the instructions of how to apply what you're looking for. And again, I'm not going to say every board has that. But if they do, that's a great resource to be utilizing to know what's expected of you. Okay. Another thing that I hear a lot of is how do we market ourselves? And by market, I just want to start with your designation. How many of you know in your state, and you can put it in your chat, how you are supposed to identify with your license? Okay, student intern. So let me go back. Right now, it's a student intern, but how are you going to identify once you become an associate, provisional, registered intern? There might be others. Those are the common ones that I hear. MFT candidate, okay. Student intern, LMAFT, okay. Now, for some of these that have initials, does your state accept the initials? I'm getting some head no's, some head shakes no. Taylor says no. Yeah, that's really important when we designate ourselves of how we can, how they want us to represent our title. So I get this a lot. In Texas, it's LMFT-associate. I can't tell you how many times I see LMFT-A. And I send them back to the rules to tell me, is that how you should properly represent yourself? Is that your title? Florida's a big one too. And Roxanne and Annalene, you can correct me, but you have to spell it out. And it's a long one for Florida, like super long.
In Colorado, you can put MFTC, Marriage and Family Therapist Candidate. You can use the
Okay.
MFTC. Mhm.
Okay.
If you're a MFTC, if you've gone through the process and you've done the, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely an important distinction. You can't give yourself a title you have not earned. That is definitely true. Okay. Let's talk about scope of competence and scope of practice. Group, do we know the difference? Is there a difference? What are your thoughts?
Sophie, I see your hand. You might want to use the reaction button at the bottom if you.
Oh, I
if
was
you-
just typing it. I didn't know if you wanted me to type it or say
okay,
it.
okay.
Is it okay
Whatever
to say?
works.
I'd rather say it.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever
So,
works.
I was just going to say the scope of the practice may be different from your scope because the practice, like a practice I'm at, my supervisor is an EMDR specialist. So the scope of her practice is far beyond my scope of competence.
Mhm. Yeah, and Sophia, that's where I think a lot of you get confused. When we're talking about scope of practice, this is what your law says as an MFT that you can do.
Mhm.
Yours for everyone else.
Oh, Got you.
Right. So it's not your individual site and what they're practicing. Even though you are correct, right? If you're not trained in EMDR, you can't.
You're saying it's what we're legally able to do with our license. Is the scope.
Correct.
Okay, got you. I did have that.
Correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, Taylor bought a stamp. Yeah, I have many of those. Okay, so anyone else? Like, do you know what your state says for your scope of practice, what you're allowed to do? Are you allowed to test? Are you allowed to diagnose? Are you allowed to see individuals? Are you allowed to see couples? Are you allowed to be a like custodian person, that evaluator, to determine, like, what does your state say as an MFT that you can actually do? I'm getting some puzzled looks.
Okay,
Looks
if
like
you
you'll be
all
looking
aren't
these
on
up.
your licensing boards right now, get on your licensing boards. Because this is, unless you're not here for supervision credit, but we need to see some participation.
Well, and the reason I asked that, because Sophia had a great point. If I'm not trained in EMDR, I can't go be an EMDR specialist or provide that service. And in some of your states, maybe you can't diagnose, or maybe you can't, again, do custody evaluations or be a witness, or it depends. Yes, Taylor, go ahead.
I know in the state of Florida, you can't practice any form. I know what you can't do, but you can't practice any form of hypnosis without like specializing in it or having something from the state saying that you're allowed to do it. You can't practice with juvenile sexual offenders, and you can't practice sex therapy without getting approval by the state.
So you can do them, you just have to get extra training.
Which goes to scope of competence.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, as an MFT, I can't clean somebody's teeth.
That is very true.
I can't do surgery.
Mhm.
Right. But then closer to home, I can't.
Annalyn, you're muted.
You're on mute, Annalyn.
I can't suggest to people supplements and sell those out of my office unless I have training as a nutritionist or something like that. And I have a colleague that he and I go round and round on that all the time. So
That's
yeah,
a good
that sort of
question,
thing.
because for me, I'm a certified life coach and crystal therapist that I did prior to this. And that is one of my curiosities, which I haven't looked into it a whole lot now, but I would like to combine those practices, and I need to know how to do that at some point. Because those things aren't even regulated by the state.
Mhm. So then you go back to the one that is regulated.
Right, but
says
is it
what they
okay to
can
put
and
them
can't do.
together, or?
I cannot give any legal advice on
Yeah,
any
yeah.
state.
So that would be something I guess I have to look into on that board of certification, because or I think what I did find is that you let people know what you're doing with them when they come to see you, or something like they have to know what you're working under, something like that.
Right. Yep. And I saw some hands. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, so Susie and I are in Minnesota together. And in Minnesota, we don't have one that defines like you can do this and this and this. It just says within your scope of competence. And it specifies that if you are not competent in that area, that you have to either you have to have training, receive training and supervision for it, and consultation, or you have to refer out. So it's not super specific, but that's why it was a puzzle book. So I was like, I'm pretty sure I know this, but I wanted to make sure before I said, yep, this is how it is.
Yep, sorry.
like-
Go ahead.
But like for myself, I I have a chemistry degree and I studied pharmacology. I worked in pharmacy for almost 10 years and I do know about medications. So when people come and I'm like, oh, that's a side effect you need to discuss with your pharmacist or your doctor. So, I mean, obviously I'm referring them back to that, but that's something that I use my knowledge about and I am trained. And I also had training as the pharmacy technician and going through that certification process as well. So that's something that I can do that's in my scope of competence that's not going to be in somebody else's that hasn't had the degree, the training and stuff that comes into practice with MFT work.
Yeah, and the question I would ask Megan is when you're operating as an MFT, when you're sitting in that chair as an LMFT or an MFT, you are not a pharmacist at that point. You are not prescribing drugs.
No, I can't prescribe anyway. I never had prescription powers, but when I refer out for medication management, for instance, and one of my clients has he's on a medication for what I referred him out for. So I have the ability to talk back and forth with his doctor. So he's seeing me regularly, but he's only seeing the psychiatrist, once every few months. So the psychiatrist, wanted me to check in with him. How are your symptoms? That's what what I'm reporting.
Well, that's what any MFT can do that. And that's very common in MFT. So how's things going? How is that medication working? Oh, you're having side effects. You need to go talk to your doctor. So yeah, they might, that we all do, right? But we don't say you probably need Wellbutrin. I think you do well on Wellbutrin. We don't do that. Right?
I don't recommend the medication, but I will tell them, for instance, he's on Latuda. So if he is no longer, having good effects from Latuda, I can say, there are other medications that work differently. This is how this one works, and this is how the other one works. And so some people may not understand that that's how they work. So that's just generally what I mean. I can't prescribe medications anyway, period.
Yeah. I mean, I would just wonder, I had a couple of different interns who were also attorneys. And I remember being behind the mirror years ago, and she was working with a couple, and the couple started talking about getting divorced. And they had some really wacko ideas about what it was like to get divorced in Florida. And she started talking to them about the law. She was an attorney in Florida. And she did divorce. And I beeped and called her back and said, no. You do not do that. That's outside of the scope of practice of an LMFT. So you could go, wow, that sounds mysterious. I've never heard that before. You really need to talk to an attorney. Here's some recommendations. So I wouldn't want to be sued because my client was like, well, Dr. Bainman said that, blah, 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 when I was sitting as an LMFT. So it would be an easy grievance because it's outside of my scope of practice in that chair.
It also would lead to dual relationship, that you would be having playing two roles, both attorney and therapist, but using knowledge from your previous life. Like I used to be a foster care worker. So when I would work with families that are in the dependency system, I have knowledge about how the system works. And I can certainly send them to the right people, but I wouldn't sit and do a case plan with them or something like that.
And that's what Heidi in the chat has also mentioned. As a pharmacist, she's got to keep those roles separate. Someone had a hand up and then it's gone. Still had a hand up? No? Okay, Taylor, go ahead.
I was going to say something, or I was going to ask something, but then right after, I think Dr. Bateman ended up answering my question. So,
okay. So I bring these things up because now we're talking about, again, there's always something legal and ethical. If you don't know, go back to your laws, go back to your ethics. Now, there's going to be times that one is going to be more stringent than the other. I would say follow the one that's more stringent. Okay. And as a reference point, I hope you all know, and if you don't, I want to give you this information. Remember AMFT, so if you're a member of AMFT, they will do legal consults with you, 15 or 30 minutes. They also tell you that they can't give you any specific advice about your state, and they are a representative of AMFT, but for general ethics questions of what I should or shouldn't do, those consults are free. Yes, Heidi?
So I wanted to say, so again, part of the pharmacist aspect, we have to take legal tests in every state we get licensed in. And it is always very clearly recommended, if you are not sure if the federal law or state law, which one takes precedence, it's whatever is stricter. You follow whichever law is stricter, and it's very clearly stated that that is what's important to do.
Mhm. And then, of course, you all should be having insurance, so malpractice insurance. They also sometimes will consult with you about legal and ethical, especially because they want to make sure that you're staying out of that realm, right? Another big thing I kind of want to talk about, especially because some of you are in internship and so you're preparing for your exit of graduation. And I think it's really important that you know the difference between your educational requirements and your licensure requirements. So to the ones who are in my supervision, I stress this a lot, because in some of your educational requirements, they might exceed what Capella is requiring, or vice versa. Capella might exceed what your state is requiring. And I can't ever remember which Carolinas. One of the Carolinas always needs, or at least last I heard, needs 150 relational hours. Well, here at Capella, you only now need 100. But because the state exceeds Capella's requirement, anyone in, again, whichever Carolinas that is, you want to adhere to the 150 educational relational hours that you need, because you can't get licensed in that state. So it's important to start looking at those differences. Okay. Does anyone know what their educational requirements are versus their licensure requirements are, and how the two might intermingle?
I do know that one without having to look at our site. So Capella requires the 100 relational hours, but Minnesota requires 150. And I live right on the border, so I'm seeking dual licensure. So the two states are also different. Capella's requirement meets North Dakota, but North Dakota also allows you to use up to 500 hours of internship to count toward your associate hours. So it's not required. You have to have at least 300, but if you have 500, you can count those toward your licensure.
Great distinction. And good job knowing, because you're a dual state, or you're getting dual license, tracking both. That's awesome. Anyone else know?
I know that for the state of Florida, it's supposed to be, I believe it's 200 relational hours. But if it's a KCREP accredited and a COAMT accredited, they'll allow Capellas they'll allow Capellas regulations instead. So we can do the 100 relational hours and the 300 total hours.
Great distinction. Capella is a COAMT accredited program. Some of your state boards don't know the difference between KCREP and COAMT. And some of them are also like, what's the word I'm looking for? Where they're combined. Someone help me out.
A composite board?
Yes, thank you. It's a
Mhm.
composite board. And so when they're a composite board, it means they have more than one licensure. And so they're using the language of each licensure. Anyone else know their educational requirements? Go ahead, Heidi.
I mainly know this because we had a lot of Hoblu in our group about this one for Washington State, there was a concern that we needed more hours than were done by Capella, but it has been determined through someone literally calling the Washington State Department of Health and being on hold for 30 minutes that they actually do match. There's just a poorly worded aspect to it. So that because Capella is COAMFTE accredited, we do meet all the requirements for state.
Awesome. Anyone
I
else
really
know?
never knew, now that you mentioned having, I'm in Texas, so maybe you know this answer. I didn't know there was a distinction between the relational. So I've never like come across that until you just mentioned it. I don't know if we need a different amount of relational than the 100.
You do.
Okay.
It will take me a minute to find it, but you do.
Nobody's ever mentioned that. I'm in my third quarter.
I'm pretty sure in Texas it's 75 relational and 125 direct, I think. Well, they just changed it, so let me pull it up. It'll give me a second out and I'll find it. Or
Oh,
I'll
so
make
you're
sure
saying
to get you
Capella
the
might
answer.
exceed what the state of Texas needs.
Right.
Okay, at least that's in the better direction.
Well, and this is important. Now,
Yeah.
a lot of state laws are moving towards the COAMFTE wording, where as long as you graduate from a COAMFTE accredited school, we will do whatever they do.
Okay.
This was recently a change in Georgia. So Georgia was 500 hours because that's what COAMFTE used to be. Y'all are so lucky. We had to do 500. So 300, that's great. But the way the law was written in Georgia, it was 500. Now, effective July 1st, they have it worded, whatever COAMFTE says, we're going to follow whatever COAMFTE says. So if any point that COAMFTE goes from, let's say 300 back to 500, I'm not wishing this upon anyone, but let's say they do, then the state law will automatically catch up and they don't have to keep revising it, right? So this is why it's really important. Follow your states, figure out what's going on, because they're the ones that are going to give you the answers. Okay, so I also want to talk about a case. Okay, let's talk about legal and ethical and how these might combine. Okay, so here in Texas, and Sophia, I will get you that answer. Just give me a second, okay? Here in Texas, this is an LPC law, okay, just so you know. So licensed professional counselor, or in Florida, the equivalent of a mental health counselor, okay? So this is not an MFT law, but I think it's great open for our discussion as we talk about legal and ethics. Okay, at Texas LPCs, the dollar amount of gift giving from your clients is $50. Group, what do our states say about gift giving? And then what does our ethics say?